All right, let's dive into some German politics.
Sounds good to me.
Today, we're looking at Die Linke's platform for the 2025 federal election.
Oh, this will be interesting.
We've got their official document, and wow, it is dense.
Yeah, I took a look myself. Definitely a lot to unpack.
Absolutely. It's packed with proposals that could really reshape Germany, from their healthcare system to housing to, well, just about everything.
It really does touch on so many different aspects of life in Germany. What struck me is how Die Linke always ties these different issues back to one core idea,
And what's that?
that the current system in Germany, it's just not working for most people.
Okay, I'm seeing that already. Let's jump right into it then, with economic justice and fairness. This is where they get, well, pretty radical, right?
Yeah, they don't hold back. They're calling for some serious redistribution of wealth.
Like straight up, they want to abolish billionaires. That's a pretty powerful statement. What does that even mean practically?
Well, it's a good slogan, that's for sure. But they do have concrete proposals. They're talking about a progressive wealth tax,
Okay, a wealth tax. So how would that work?
starting at 1% for assets over €1 million. But, and here's the big kicker, it jumps to 12% for anyone hitting that billionaire status.
Whoa, 12%? That's a hefty chunk of change. So it's not just about raising revenue, it's about reshaping the whole economic landscape,
Exactly. It's a statement about the kind of society they want to see.
taking aim at extreme wealth to fund, well, I guess all these social programs they're proposing. But, there's always that debate. Wouldn't this discourage investment and wealth creation?
That's the big question, isn't it? Does it stifle innovation or does it create a more level playing field? We'll definitely have to get into that.
For sure, it's a complex issue. But let's get down to the nitty-gritty. How would all this affect the average German?
Think about it. No more VAT on essential groceries. No VAT on public transport. That would be massive for families.
Especially those who are struggling to make ends meet. It would be a huge relief, I could imagine.
Absolutely. It would put money back in people's pockets right away.
That's immediate, tangible change. But you have to wonder, is it sustainable? Can they really make these cuts and still fund everything else they're proposing?
It's a question of priorities, right? And speaking of tackling costs, they want to create something called a price authority.
A price authority, what is that?
It sounds a bit futuristic almost, but the idea is they would regulate prices for essential goods and services.
So things like rent, energy, food, that sort of thing.
Exactly. Basically putting a stop to corporations just raising prices whenever they want.
It's like a direct intervention in the free market. Kind of the opposite of how things have been working for a while now.
Right. It's a big swing. But then again, wouldn't that lead to potential shortages, maybe even a black market if prices are controlled too tightly? It's definitely a double-edged sword.
For sure. You can see the appeal, but there are definitely potential downsides to consider. Now, on a slightly different note, they also have some interesting ideas about food waste.
They want to ban food speculation, the kind of Wall Street stuff that can drive up food prices globally.
So taking on the big players, trying to stabilize food costs. That makes sense. What else are they proposing?
Businesses would have to donate any surplus food they have to charity, any food that's still edible, rather than just throwing it away.
Wow, that's hitting multiple targets at once. Reducing waste, combating hunger. It's a clever strategy.
Yeah, connecting those different dots.
But logistically, how would they enforce something like that? It seems like a huge undertaking.
It would definitely be a challenge. That's something we'd have to dig into further. Now, shifting gears a bit, let's talk about the elephant in the room, or rather, the apartment in the room, the housing crisis.
The housing crisis, yeah, that's a big one. Rent is out of control, especially in the cities, and people are feeling the squeeze.
Big time. And Die Linke is very clear. They think the current government's efforts are just not cutting it.
So what's their solution?
A nationwide rent cap. No more increases, period.
Whoa, that's a huge intervention in the market. It would be a game changer for renters. But wouldn't it also discourage new construction? And what about landlords neglecting their properties if they can't raise rents?
You're raising some valid points there. There are always unintended consequences to think about.
Absolutely. And this ties into their whole idea of socially responsible climate action, because they also want to abolish the Modernisierungsumlage.
Right, that's the rule that lets landlords pass on renovation costs to their tenants.
So basically, if you want to make your building more energy efficient, great. But you can't just stick your tenants with the bill.
They're trying to make sure that climate action doesn't come at the expense of the most vulnerable people.
I see the logic there. And it doesn't stop there. They also want to make utilities more affordable.
They're talking about a tiered pricing system for heating and electricity based on income and a complete ban on utility disconnections.
That's a major shift. It really underscores their commitment to social safety nets. But wouldn't that put a lot of strain on energy providers?
It's a balancing act for sure. Affordability versus the long-term stability of these essential services.
So they're tackling rent increases and utility costs. What else is on their housing agenda?
They're taking aim at real estate speculation. They want to increase the tax on profits from flipping properties.
Closing those loopholes.
Well,
But that's never easy, is it?
And they want to ban share deals. This is a way for investors to buy and sell large apartment blocks without the same taxes as individual properties.
So targeting those big real estate moves that drive up prices. Now, we talked about vacant apartments before. There are millions of them just sitting empty.
2 million, to be exact, which is crazy when you think about how many people are struggling to find housing.
And Link wants to do something about it, right?
They're proposing a vacancy tax. Basically, if you leave your apartment empty, you're going to have to pay up.
Makes sense. It incentivizes people to either rent them out or sell them, getting them back on the market.
And they even suggest the possibility of temporarily seizing long-term vacant properties.
Whoa, that's a big step. They're not playing around. It's a really strong statement about the right to housing.
Yeah, it's a very different way of thinking about property.
Housing as a need, not just an investment.
Yeah.
I can see how that fits into their overall philosophy. Now, let's move on to another crucial area, healthcare.
All right, healthcare. Link is pretty critical of the current system, saying it favors the wealthy.
Yeah, the two-tier system with long wait times, staffing shortages, and the growing influence of private equity, it's definitely under strain.
And they want to move towards a solidarity-based system.
So everyone contributes, everyone benefits, regardless of income. A sort of universal healthcare model.
Exactly, like some other European countries have.
But how would they even transition to something like that?
Right.
And how would it be funded, especially with an aging population and rising healthcare costs?
They want to get rid of the income ceiling for contributions, so even the highest earners contribute based on their full income.
Interesting. And they want to bring private insurance back into the public system. It's about pooling resources and creating a more equitable system.
Right, spreading the risk and the responsibility.
That's a huge change. It would be a massive political battle for sure. There would be a lot of pushback.
Definitely. And they're also addressing the situation of healthcare workers themselves.
Yeah, better pay, better working conditions, less influence from private equity firms, things like that.
Exactly, recognizing that a healthy healthcare system depends on having well-supported healthcare workers.
And they want to expand the scope of practice for certain professionals, like pharmacists and therapists, to increase access to care.
Especially in rural areas where it can be harder to find specialists.
It's about being more flexible and using resources effectively. And they're talking about mental health care, too.
They want to improve access to mental health care and reduce wait times for therapy.
It's a growing need, and it's good that they're acknowledging that. Now, before we move on to the international scene, let's touch on caregiving.
That's an often overlooked aspect of healthcare. Linke wants to provide more support for family caregivers.
People who are taking care of loved ones, often without much recognition or support, they're proposing things like paid leave, financial benefits, and access to respite care.
And they're addressing the issue of the 24-hour care system, which often relies on foreign workers who are vulnerable to exploitation.
They want stricter regulations to protect those workers and ensure fair wages and working conditions.
It's about making sure that affordable care doesn't come at the expense of workers' rights.
All right, so we've covered their ideas for a more just and equitable Germany, from the economy to housing to healthcare. But they don't stop there. They also have some pretty strong opinions about Germany's role in the world. But we'll save that for part 2 of our deep dive.
You're telling me their foreign policy proposals are really something else. Linke wants to completely rethink Germany's place in the world, especially when it comes to military power.
Okay, so let's break this down. They start by saying that past German and EU foreign policies, well, they've actually contributed to global instability. That's a pretty harsh criticism.
It's a strong statement for sure. They believe Germany needs a completely new approach, one that focuses on diplomacy and resolving conflicts peacefully rather than resorting to military solutions.
So basically putting peace and diplomacy front and center. It makes sense considering their focus on social justice at home. They see militarism as part of the problem.
Exactly. They're connecting the dots between a peaceful foreign policy and achieving social justice within Germany. But the big question is, how does this translate into actual conflicts, like the war in Ukraine.
Yeah, that's the real test, isn't it? What's their position on that?
It's complicated. While they condemn Russia's invasion, calling it a clear violation of international law, they're not on board with sending more weapons to Ukraine.
It's definitely going to raise some eyebrows. A lot of people believe that arming Ukraine is the only way to stop Russia.
Linke sees it differently. They think sending more weapons will just escalate the conflict, making it last longer and causing more suffering for Ukrainians.
So what's the alternative?
They're calling for a diplomatic push involving countries like China, Brazil, and other nations from the global south.
Bringing more players to the table.
Yeah.
But those countries haven't exactly been quick to condemn Russia. Do they really have the influence to make a difference?
Linke believes they have the economic and political weight to pressure Russia into serious negotiations. They also want targeted sanctions aimed at the Kremlin and those responsible for war crimes, rather than sanctions that hurt ordinary Russians.
It's a tough balancing act, trying to apply pressure without causing too much collateral damage. But let's be honest, how much influence can Germany really have on global diplomacy, especially in a conflict as complex as this one?
It's a good question. It remains to be seen how much they could actually achieve on the international stage. But they're not shying away from expressing their views. And it's not just about Ukraine either. They're strong advocates for self-determination for Palestinians and Kurds.
So basically, they want to see a world where power is more evenly distributed? But is that even realistic given the current global situation?
It's a long-term goal, no doubt. And on that note, here's their most radical foreign policy proposal: a complete ban on arms exports from Germany.
Whoa, that's huge. Germany is one of the world's biggest arms exporters. What would that even mean for the country, both economically and strategically?
They see the global arms trade as fueling conflicts and profiting from human suffering. They want to shift those industries to civilian production instead.
It's a bold statement, but is it feasible?
Yeah.
Especially with the current geopolitical tensions, it seems like a tough sell.
And of course, we can't talk about Die Linke and foreign policy without mentioning NATO. They've been pretty vocal in their criticism of the alliance.
They see it as a relic of the Cold War, something that's no longer relevant in today's world. And get this, they actually want to replace it with a completely new European security structure.
They envision a cooperative security system for Europe.
So no more NATO. Seems pretty radical. What would this new system even look like? And how would they ensure Europe's safety without NATO's collective defense?
It's a big question mark. They even talk about potentially including Russia and Turkey in this new structure eventually, but only if they stop acting aggressively. It's a vision that relies on a lot of things falling into place.
It sounds like they're banking on a pretty optimistic view of international relations. But let's move on to another big global issue that features prominently in their platform: climate change and sustainability.
They're definitely not holding back when it comes to criticizing the current government's climate policies. They say that continuing to rely on fossil fuels is just not an option.
So what's their plan? All windmills and solar panels, or is there more to it?
It goes beyond just renewables. They want to grow the whole energy sector under public ownership and control.
Wow, nationalizing the energy sector. That's a major move. How would they even convince voters, especially those who are skeptical of government intervention, that this is the right way to go?
They're proposing a $200 billion investment fund to help companies make the switch to climate-friendly practices. Plus, they want to expand the existing Climate and Transformation Fund.
So, a lot of money being thrown at the problem. But we've seen big green initiatives before, and they don't always work out as planned. How would they ensure that this money is actually used effectively and not just wasted or ending up in the wrong pockets?
They're very clear that any state funding comes with conditions. Companies receiving support would have to guarantee things like job security, fair wages, and stick to their investment plans.
So, making sure that workers benefit from the transition as well. That's a crucial point. They're trying to avoid the mistakes of the past, where environmental initiatives often ended up prioritizing corporate interests over people.
And it's not just about production. They want a resource conservation law to cut down on consumption and encourage a circular economy. This means stricter rules for how durable products are, making them easier to repair and recycle.
So moving away from a throwaway culture, it's a more holistic approach. But wouldn't that mean higher prices for consumers, at least in the beginning? And what about the jobs that might be lost in industries that rely on disposable products?
Those are valid concerns. They would need to have a plan for dealing with those potential consequences. And here's another big idea. They want to ban waste exports from the EU.
So taking responsibility for their own waste instead of just shipping it off to other countries.
Yeah.
It definitely fits with their overall philosophy.
And to really drive home their commitment to public control, they're proposing to bring waste management back under public ownership.
So garbage collection wouldn't be a for-profit business anymore. It's an interesting idea. But would it actually make waste management better and fairer, or would it just create another layer of bureaucracy?
That's a debate worth having. Now, beyond those core policy areas, Link has a few other proposals that really stand out, highlighting their commitment to tackling inequality and unsustainable practices head on.
You mentioned some intrigue points before the break. Lay them on me.
Okay, first up, they want to ban private jets and mega yachts.
Whoa, now that's a striking image. No more billionaires cruising around in their floating palaces. But seriously, how would they even enforce something like that? And wouldn't it hurt the industries that cater to the super rich?
They're saying that these symbols of excessive luxury are incompatible with a sustainable future. It's about sending a message that this kind of conspicuous consumption by the elite is no longer okay in a world facing climate change and inequality.
It's definitely a symbolic gesture, but symbols can be powerful in politics. What else do they want to ban?
Excessive air travel is next on the chopping block. They're proposing a frequent flyer tax. After your 5th flight in a year, you'd have to pay an extra €200 for each additional flight.
Ouch, that would make me think twice about booking that quick trip. But wouldn't it mainly affect people who have to travel for work or family reasons? And how would they even keep track of everyone's flights?
It would be a logistical challenge for sure, but they're not afraid to take drastic measures if they believe it's necessary. And speaking of challenging norms, they also want to completely legalize cannabis.
Now, that would be a major shift for Germany. Are we talking full legalization, like in some U.S. states, or something more regulated?
They want a total rethink of drug policies based on the idea of harm reduction. This means decriminalizing possession for personal use and providing safe consumption spaces.
So, moving away from punishment and towards a public health approach. But wouldn't there be concerns about increased drug use and all the potential problems that come with that?
It's a complex issue, and it's been debated for years. And finally, on the topic of democracy, they want to lower the voting age to 16 for all elections and give voting rights to all residents who've lived in Germany for at least 5 years, even if they're not citizens.
So, expanding the electorate, giving more people a voice. But wouldn't this be controversial for those who believe that voting should only be for citizens?
It reflects their belief that everyone who lives and contributes to German society should have a say in how it's run.
All right, so we've covered a lot of ground here. Die Linke's platform is ambitious, comprehensive, and full of bold ideas. They're addressing everything from the global arms trade to the price of groceries.
They're challenging the status quo, presenting a radically different vision for Germany. One that's based on socialist ideals and a deep commitment to social justice, peace, sustainability, and democratic participation.
It's a vision that will definitely resonate with some voters and turn others away. But one thing's for sure, they're making people think about the kind of future they want for Germany and what role they want their country to play in the world. Now it's your turn to weigh in. What stands out to you from everything we've discussed so far?
Well, that was quite a journey through Die Linke's platform. I'm still processing all of it. It's definitely a bold vision for Germany, putting people and the planet before profit. But is it all just a bit too idealistic?
It's ambitious, that's for sure. But I think they're tapping into a real sense of unease, about the direction things are going in, not just in Germany, but globally.
Yeah, there's a lot of anxiety about inequality, climate change, the cost of living. People are looking for solutions. But are Die Linke's proposals actually realistic? Can they really pull off such a massive transformation?
That's the big question, isn't it? One thing that really struck me is how much emphasis they put on public ownership, bringing all those key industries like energy, transportation, waste management back under state control. That's a huge shift. It's like they're turning the clock back on decades of free market thinking. They're saying, these are essential services. They shouldn't be about making profits. They should be run for the benefit of everyone.
And they're challenging that whole idea that the private sector always does things better. They're arguing that a democratically controlled state can actually be more efficient and fairer, especially when it comes to meeting basic needs.
It's a compelling argument,
Yep.
but it does require a certain amount of trust in the government, doesn't it? And then there's their foreign policy, which is, well, let's just say it's not your typical German foreign policy.
Mm-hmm.
A complete ban on arms exports, getting rid of NATO, those are pretty radical ideas.
Their pacifism is really at the core of their ideology. They see militarism as intertwined with all the systems of exploitation and inequality that they're trying to dismantle. They want Germany to be a force for peace, not a major player in the arms trade.
It's a noble goal.
Yeah.
But can you really be a pacifist nation in a world where there's still so much conflict and aggression? Isn't some level of military strength necessary to deter threats?
They're putting their faith in diplomacy and cooperation, even with countries like Russia and China. They believe a more peaceful world is possible, but it's going to take a lot of trust and goodwill, which, let's be honest, is not always easy to find in international relations.
And we can't forget about their focus on Eastern Germany. They're really trying to connect with voters there who feel left behind and ignored by the political establishment.
It's a smart move, politically speaking. There's still a lot of resentment and economic disparity in the former East, and Die Linke is tapping into that.
Their proposals for targeted investments and support for Eastern German pensions, it's about addressing those inequalities and giving people a sense of hope that things can change.
It's about showing that they understand the concerns of people who feel like they've been forgotten by the system.
Now, beyond specific policies, what's really interesting is the bigger picture they're painting. This vision of a society based on solidarity, equality, sustainability is very appealing to a lot of people.
It resonates with those who are disillusioned with the current state of affairs, who are looking for a more humane and just world, one that puts people and the environment first.
It's a powerful vision, but it faces some huge challenges, right? The influence of corporations, the complexities of global politics, the way things are already set up. It's not going to be easy to change all that.
And then there's the biggest question of all. Will enough German voters actually buy into this vision? Will they give Die Linke the power to make these changes?
It's a gamble, for sure.
Yeah.
But regardless of whether they win or lose, I think they've injected something important into the political debate. They're forcing people to think about the big questions, about what kind of society we want, what role the government should play, what our values are.
They're challenging the status quo, pushing the boundaries of what's considered politically possible. And whether you agree with them or not, I think that's a good thing.
It's about getting people to think critically, to imagine alternatives. And at the end of the day, that's what democracy is all about, isn't it? Having those tough conversations, debating different ideas, and deciding what kind of future we want to build together. So, as you reflect on everything we've discussed about Die Linke's platform, think about this. What kind of world do you want to see? And what are you willing to do to make it happen?